Hello, everyone. I'm Gemma Star, and welcome to another episode of Man Speak. Man Speak is the offshoot to our Heart Warrior series, where I've been interviewing men and asking them to articulate their journey into the heart. And Man Speak eventuated because some of these men were so embodied and wise and able to teach certain topics and discuss certain topics that merited a whole episode to themselves. So thus the creation of Man Speak. Today's special guest is our number 24 Heart Warrior who's returning, and his name is Sacha Stone. Sacha is an activist, a truth gladiator, and he's also a beautiful poet. So I'm really looking forward to chatting with Sacha today. Now, Sacha's chosen subject is the heart of sorrow. And he clarified to me as universal source code to redemption, resurrection, ascension. This subject also focuses on the tribulation and the reckoning, Judgment Day, visiting upon each of us as fractals of the collective universal at this epical time. So this is going to be such a fascinating episode, and enjoy. Hello, Sacha Stone. Welcome to Man Speak.
Very happy to see you again, Gemma.
Thank you. So I just love your chosen topic, and I've really been feeling into it this week. The heart of sorrow. Where shall we start?
At the beginning is generally the best place. So, the reason why I felt that it might be I wouldn't say propitious, but it might be relevant to speak to that subject is because from what I'm seeing in the world at large today, that is a theme which is playing through at the collective level. And it's there are many different dynamics at work. Obviously, in the first instance, I am looking at the travesty of early death syndrome, sudden infant death syndrome, quote unquote, courtesy of our administrators, sudden adult death syndrome, which all speaks to the satanic shroud that has been cast over our species in recent days, months, years by this genetic interventionism that's been going on, courtesy of so-called COVID. And I know that the trauma response to this kind of monstrous paradigm shifting nightmare, the trauma response to it is normally that we move into a collective denial. And, oh, it didn't happen. Business as usual. No, it happened. It happened. The ramifications and the consequences of it are only just becoming clear, retroactively or retrospectively. But more than that, the consequences of it are changing gear, moving up a gear. So we've got genetic interventionism, we've got people dropping dead all around the planet. And it's not just people who've necessarily been subjected to you know what. It is also the nano shedding. It's the weaponization of the biosphere that has actually occurred as a result of this nonsense. And that's something which we can't even begin to adjudicate at this time. We don't know what the long-term consequences are. I've spent the best part of 2.5 years speaking to scores and scores of, probably hundreds, but let me rein it back and say possibly 50, 60, maybe thereabouts, of the world's leading researchers, doctors, medical scientists, health advocates, microscopists, microbiologists, biochemists, frontline nurses, doctors, and so on. And I'm afraid I can't, as an activist, as somebody who's an advocate for humanity, I can't ignore the common theme in those thousands and thousands of hours of conversation. The fact of the matter is, we are systemically and endemically under attack as a species. And it's not just on the physical level, as we all know. It's a spiritual warfare every bit as much as it is biochemically and biophysically. So this is it. This is the great tribulation, the great reckoning. The great Armageddon, in that sense, is underway. And the net equation that comes out of this is sorrow, a sense of profound loss, a departure from our innocence as good citizens of the realm, having believed at the societal level and the cultural level, and even at the civilizational level, we have believed in the status quo. We have taken the knee to the crowns, to the Caesars, and believed that our delegation of authority to the goodly kings and queens was a social contract, and that we would be taken care of. No, that hasn't occurred. The status quo weaponized every aspect of our reality against us by design, orchestrated and engineered the luciferic thrall of entropy, which is war, disease, and poverty, the three themes I keep going back to, because that's the signature of our so-called civilization, is a civilization that is perpetually at war, a civilization which is constantly diseased, diseased at every turn, and poverty doesn't just describe a lack of financial wealth. It's moral poverty. It's moral destitution. It's a spiritual vacuum every bit as much as it is a financial vacuum. So this poverty, disease, and war describes the signature of our civilization. And again, the net equation out of that for each of us individually is sorrow. Not to those who are drunk on false light worship and idolatry, because the fools who are pretending that life is great and everything's gung-ho and we've got through the worst of it and business as normal, are people who have already departed from the greater part of themselves. They are not humans in the truest sense, in that they have not and will not apprehend the reckoning in their own heart. They will not acknowledge and accede the fact that our life force that we have permitted to be harvested individually has now aggregated into that collective egregore elemental cloud energy, which is devouring and living as the great parasite off the life force of our brothers and sisters, oftentimes on the other side of the world. So that's the great imbalance that we're living through, and that's the thrall I'm talking about, is the the poverty of consciousness, the destitution of spiritual dimensional morality that we fail to apply or to demand in our lives as individuals, as sovereign beings, the godliness, our divine flame. That's the poverty I'm talking about. I'm not just talking about money. Money's the least of it. And that, for me, is what describes our signature, as I've said. And I want to talk about the heart of sorrow to see if we can identify in a dialogue, which is unlikely, but we should try as good humans. Let's try to identify the atom seed of that sorrow. Where does it issue from? We can choose to be victims and believe ourselves as victims of life, circumstance, fate, karma, incarnation. We could choose to be on the back foot as a victim and believe that when things don't work out well for us in life, it must be attributed to the failure or the folly of the third party or of somebody else, which is what most humans do most of the time. And I don't exclude myself from that. Blaming others. One has a tendency to wake up in the morning and look at how fucked up one's own life is in different ways and go, well, that's because so-and-so didn't live up to the expectation, or that's because I was led to believe, or that's because, and there's always this constant barrage of misidentification with reality and blaming the other for one's standing. So that has to end if we are to begin to approach the source code of this deep abiding sadness. And ultimately, the sadness or the sorrow simply describes the trial of separation, which goes back to the genesis of our individuated soul as it departed Alpha Omega, or the Atman, and moved into its experiential journey through multiple dimensions and incarnations and universes. And here we are. So let's just have the conversation about that signature and see if we can identify the true root cause of it, and if there's some kind of real resolution or remedy that we can bring about in the sanctity of our own hearts and minds.
Wow, what a great intro. Love it. Well, I'm all for it. So I will say that I'm a woman of the heart. I'm not a scholar. I haven't studied the Bible, but I can bring in the feminine heart. I can bring in my own hero's journey and the journey I see in humanity. And that's what I would love to contribute. So yeah, I didn't. Did you want to take it somewhere, or did you want me to ask questions? I mean,
I'm here to answer questions. I didn't prepare a thesis, if that's what you mean.
No, I didn't know when you said. So, what came to mind when you were talking about that is when you were talking about the sadness in the collective was betrayal, and through the collective trusting the powers that be. And now with the sadness is the betrayal. Would you say that was a relevant emotion for?
Yes, but it's our betrayal of self, and that's the gist, and that's what we need to get back to. Again, one is trapped in the dharma karma wheel so long as one believes in the victim in any way, shape, or form. Because if one believes that one is a victim of anything, then your foundational belief is that there is no justice or natural law at work in the cosmos. And if you believe that there is no foundational natural law or justice at play in the cosmos, then you are absolutely you're cast adrift. You've cast yourself adrift at that point. And that's, I think, is the issue, is again, blame and people feeling that they're not accountable for the journey of their own soul. And this is why in my in my language, I speak in simple terms of pure truth and right action in the living moment. And I always emphasize the living moment, because the living moment is the one wherein one is actualized and present, fully present, to the fullest extent that one is capable. And that state of actualization strictly forbids any form of victimization. It doesn't matter what is happening to you or happening to one. One does not and must not blame at that point. Simply be able to see the geometry of one's own life in any given moment in so-called time, and then correct it. And that's where grace comes in. So long as one is walking or standing in grace, one has the capacity at every turn to be able to transmute a shitty situation into a positive outcome. But the difficult bit there is that the path of least resistance to the highest outcome is always pure truth and right action in the living moment. But try and tell that to a banker or a stockbroker who's in the middle of some wicked play in business and trying to get through the day and not get sacked and meet the bonuses. And, it could be a traffic warden giving out tickets and transgressing their own conscience by giving an old woman in a wheelchair, a ticket because her wheel on her in her car that she's just got out of is 3 inches over the yellow line. So technically, yes, by statutory law, this piece of shit in a costume calling himself a traffic warden is able to give her a ticket and penalize the woman for $120. But in that is a satanic interaction, purely satanic, Saturnian, draconian, evil, pure evil. It's wicked. And yet that traffic warden will not see it that way. Oh, he was following the rules, the statutory provisions, the codes and ordinances are clearly laid out. This is not his fault. So he's abrogated and abnegated his sovereign standing as a living being in favor for spells and bonds on paper, and allowed the spells and the bonds to take possession of his soul. So that's satanic. If that's not satanic, I don't know what is. And for me, life is broken down into this very, very simply. Most wickedness happens with good people pretending at just getting through life and then excusing themselves. So that's where the moral turpitude or the degradation of morality is caught up in that flux of good humans working for the man just to get by and feed the kids, just to pay the mortgage. And this is how we fabricate the excuses and step away from our conscience, our divine conscience, and standing under universal law as sons and daughters of God. We make that terrible, terrible infraction against self throughout the day. If you're living in a city, you have no choice, it seems, but to break the law, universal law, simply by surviving in the grid. And that's why I've been appealing to people for many, many years. And that's why to step outside of that matrix hegemony and to step into sovereignty and get back into relationship with the soil, because that is the only way we can bring about resolution and remedy. It's by putting our feet back onto the sacred soil and stepping away from tarmac, concrete, rubber soles on the feet. Anything that disconnects us from the true feedback of the telluric forces of the earth, the paramagnetic forces of the earth, which then allow Kundalini to rise and the so-called chakra or crown to activate. And that's where you become crowned as a son or daughter of God, is with the activation through the crown and that reconfiguration to the dielectric forces. So the marriage of the dielectric forces and the paramagnetic forces through this temple becomes the only covenant that is actually worth anything. And this is what the new earth speaks to, has spoken to. I've been beating this drum for many, many years because it's a very simple equation. But I have a tendency, I have a skill in being able to speak to that in a multiplicity of different ways to try to get folks to see and understand. mostly I'm trying to have the conversation with myself, but I'm happy in exploring the dimensions of pure truth, right action in the living now. That's the Trinity, because the pure truth, again, is the I am, is the Atman, is the I am standing in pure truth. This is a vertical. This is a vertical principle. This is, you could be completely standing still. It's vertical. This is the being here now. And the doing is the lateral, is the horizontal, is where the action. That's why I speak in terms of consciousness in action, because consciousness on its own actually means very little. The illusion I always draw is that a bean sprout is conscious. So is a seashell, some crustacean. Consciousness is not the thing. The universe is conscious. I mean, everything's conscious, but consciousness in action, this is how we manifest, study the etymology of these words. And this is what we were born to do and to be, is to manifest, is to embody, enact, and manifest in this realm, and not be wage slaves to some draconian fiction that literally parasites off our life force until we die. Because that's all it does. But it is not doing it. We are the ones permitting it, permissioning, and activating it. When you get that equation in one perfect moment in time, actually you step out of time, as I keep saying. That is where timelessness is to be found. That's the samadhi state. That's the moment of actualization, which leads to bliss very quickly. How can it lead anywhere but to bliss when one is finally exiting the matrix? And again, to beat another donkey to death, there is no escaping the matrix. There is only escaping by falling within it, by nesting perfectly within it. You nest your geometry perfectly into it by witnessing, bearing witness to it in the light of pure truth until you have harmonized and made sense of all of the fractures, all of the dissonance, all of the dystopia, all of it. You've harmonized it within, and then you nest perfectly within the geometry of the matrix, and that's your exit. Now you are not contained by it because you've become still point. So there is no element that can gain traction on you. That's the ultimate goal of consciousness and sovereignty, sovereign consciousness, which is Christhood.
Wow. So let's go back to the example of the traffic warden, or maybe it could be a more relevant example, maybe of a nurse who has been working the past 2 or 3 years. And they've come into a realization that they didn't follow their heart. They followed an alternative agenda, but they're becoming aware of it now. Where can they start finding peace?
Well, in exactly what I've said, I don't think I could really say it any better. I'll try. By recognizing that the path of least resistance, the highest outcome in your particular predicament, is always the same thing, which is to start to conduct oneself in grace, in the now. And that means if you are conscious that you are breaching your conscience, then you must change. You must no longer do that which breaches your conscience. In the case of the nurse, that means she has got to tender her resignation. In the case of the nurse, it means that she must, or she can infiltrate. If she has great courage, she can infiltrate, and she can do what she can to alleviate the suffrage of people who are illegally, illicitly, immorally, unethically being put onto certain medications, for instance. And I mean, but that would be breaking the statutory law, which will see her frog marched into prison if she gets caught, for violating her code. So there's always tremendous dangers in trying to, by stealth, get into the game and do right action, whilst you're disguised, a wolf disguised as a sheep. It's very difficult. One can do it. I've certainly done it. I wouldn't recommend it. It's dangerous. But I think what would make more sense than that would be to simply remove oneself from the equation. I deal with people on a daily basis through the New Earth movement and through people connected to my various networks who write to me. And I spend a sizable percent of my day reading letters and messages coming back from people all around the world in different walks of life. So I have a very broad spectrum of experience and feedback that I'm able to draw upon. So I understand these dilemmas, like the one you've just raised of the nurse. I probably had 3 or 4 dozen nurses write plaintive emails to me and messages asking me the same question. Actually, it would have been hundreds by now. So, same thing with doctors. Same thing with people who are police as well. I've had a number of letters from police, including chiefs of police. Very interesting. And saying the same thing. Well, I know I'm a moral person. I know I'm a good person. I know I entered this profession with the best will in the world. And yet here we are. In the case of Captain Ray, oh Christ, I've forgotten his second name. He was the former chief of police in Philadelphia. I made a film with him. I hope I can remember the name by the end of this interview, and then I can drop it so people can refer to it. But on police corruption, I made a film with him a few years ago. He was a classic example of a moral individual who was standing in his Christed light. He happened to be a police chief. And when they started to change the rules and regulations of policing, as a chief, he disagreed vehemently against the policy changes coming in from the government. He could see that those policy changes were being fed by the Fabianist agenda, this Marxist, socialist, satanic agenda. He could see that this was an attempt to stupefy the police. The big thing that happened that broke the camel's back in his case was that they introduced a policy in the police service in the United States, where they started to only sanction police who had very low IQs. They wanted the thickest thugs to be recruited as police, who would follow instructions unflinchingly without any conscience or moral code. When he saw that that was the policy of recruitment, he was absolutely appalled and did everything he could to fight against it. He failed. He then ended up taking his uniform and going in and joining the 9/11 protests at the time, and the Occupy Wall Street protests and what have. So he started becoming a frontline activist in his police chief uniform. That, of course, got him into a whole heap of trouble. But that's an example of a Christed individual, and he acted on his code, and he withdrew from the force, spoke vehemently against it, and then took the best of it, which was his uniform, to join raggedy activists and sleep in tents. And that, as an old man, that to me is extraordinary. And wow, did he feel the love? Did he feel the love from humanity, from people? So that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just changing the entire trajectory of one's life as that nurse, who maybe also be a young mother, maybe a single mother. So there's always circumstances that one can look at in one's life that go, well, it's just not comfortable or convenient. It's not comfortable or convenient for me to stand on conscience right now. Let me just get through another day, week, month, year. Let me just get through that next bonus. Let me just get through that next promotion. And then I will deal with conscience. You see, that is very dangerous. Very, very dangerous indeed. Because when you have a conscience activated, but you fail to act on it, you have now begun to accumulate a very, very egregious form of karmic blowback. And this is something we all have to be very, very conscious of in our own lives, in our own way. I can't stand in judgment over any other human being other than to say, we know when we fuck up. We know when we're doing it. And if we consistently do it, well, I hope you have the stamina to consistently forgive yourself. I do. But
is that why they attempt to keep us in survival mode, Sacha? Because when we're in survival mode, we don't have time to connect to the heart or to connect to Mother Earth, as you suggested before. And we don't have time for, or the luxury of, spiritual development.
Well, it's all connected, but if you want to break it down to its primary cause, the reason for that systemic oppression, draconian containment of humanity and the way that we think and function, that comes down to soul harvest. So that's essentially what it is. It's about stealing the fire, the kundalini, the life force, which is where sex magic comes in, and the sexualization of our reality, the perversification and pornographicization of our high street, of media, of every element of our lives, and keep that sexual titillation going. That is constantly keeping the sex energy awake and alert, and then to sell appetite, and then to reward appetite. These disgusting reality shows that are on television and that make it into social media with young men and women being put together in a situation where they've got to live together, and he said, she said, and they've that people, that he's fucking her and she's just broke up with him and now they're at war, and that is the perversification of our social culture that I'm talking about. That's become the stuff that we want to view. We want to sniff each other's panties, apparently, and really get up close and personal into each other's psychosexual entanglements. Really? I'd rather sanction hardcore pornography on a computer screen to someone than that, because you're not tampering with love, with the fabric of relationship, and perversifying that in technicolor, and that's become the status quo in terms of what we're feeding, especially younger people. And as I mentioned recently, also the profiling going on and exemplifying of porn stars and cage fighters. I think we touched on this briefly. So that's two classic sides of the same scale, because the woman who is getting gangbanged on the one hand, and the man in the cage who is tearing the eyeballs out of an innocent contestant, they're both the same equation. They're both lost. One is the lost male, one is the lost female, desperately lost, desperately, pitifully lost. And that's become the premier appetite of our viewing pleasure. Why? Well, it's salacious, obviously, but it adrenalizes us sitting in our dimly lit living rooms on moth-eaten sofas. It adrenalizes the blood and makes us feel almost alive, but it's a pornographicization of our life force. It's a false light excitement of life force. It's not stimulating us about, let's study butterflies, or let's go out and walk in the forest, and let's go and, you know, try and spot the jaguars or the pumas in the mountains. Let's go and do something and engage with nature. Let's go hiking. Let's do anything that gets us our feet back to the sacred soil. You know, we're not, you know, Girl Guides and Boy Scouts, because they were also part of a kind of Disney pedophilic culture. But the truth of the matter is, at least there were campfires, you know, and walks in the woods. And that was part of the standardized play with youngsters in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and to some extent the 80s. The 80s, I think it started changing thereafter. So these are all things that speak also to the trial of separation, our loss and the sorrow that we feel because we've become disconnected to foundational spiritual dimension or moral dimension.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks, Sacha. So you spoke of the resurrection and the ascension. Where does this come into the equation?
Well, that speaks to one theme, which is one's own shamanic journey and one's own game of survival. which ultimately leads to the shamanic journey, provided we are not in complete denial. And then that shamanic journey leads to a shamanic death. It can only but lead to the shamanic death. Otherwise, it's not a shamanic journey. And that shamanic death, provided the death is undertaken and witnessed in its raw state in honor, leads to regenesis or resurrection every time. If the shamanic death is aborted because one is too afraid to enter that state, so one then recoils from the shamanic process of death and resurrection and reverts back into addictions, bad habits, hanging out with the boys or the girls, going into some sort of old familial patterns of self-destruction, then time out, you probably lost the ship in this lifetime and have to come back again to address that shamanic death and rebirth. But a great many souls, to their great credit, do find the courage in the shamanic journey. And again, this great era of sorrow and the shroud of sadness that is really cast now as a thrall across our world is going to be leading us into that valley of death, where so many of us, for the very first time in our soul's experience, are going to be needing to pay close attention to exactly what I'm describing, because it's a collective shamanic underpass that we're moving through at the civilizational level. And the DNA and mRNA interventionism that's happened, courtesy not just of injections, but also, I mean, you could talk about the injections going back to the First World War. So it's not just COVID. We're talking about going right the way back to Spanish flu, baby. What do you think brought about Spanish flu? Same thing. So it's all of that interventionism. It's 100 years of steel needles pumping synthetic molecules into the human family. Billions and billions of injections over 100 years. Billions, each one of them injecting synthetic molecules in. And don't pretend, I could just hear the naysayers going on about, oh, but polio. Don't start that bullshit with me. You don't know nothing about polio. What started polio? DDT started polio. The poisons that they were pumping in the air to chemical growth formulas, DDT, is what led to polio. There was no polio before DDT. So the idea that the injections came along and saved us from polio, no, they stopped DDT. They blanket outlawed it, but they lied about it. So we never took action against the governments or the parent corporation for that travesty. And polio was then ascribed to just disappeared. Oh, it must have been the good medicine. No, it wasn't. And so it's gone on like that. Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent again.
I think the key word there, Sacha, was courage, because I know from my own journey, even, before the show, I was a little bit nervous because it's a topic that I know you're so articulate at, and I didn't feel quite ready. But it's from the fragility of the heart that we find the courage. It's through the connection with the heart, just sitting in silence and stillness and connecting to the heart. Have you got anything to say around that to help people who maybe do feel disconnected, how to find this courage from the heart?
I don't really. I'm not a meditator, and I'm not a prayerful man, and I don't meditate, and I don't have a discipline per se. My only discipline is to pull myself into whack or into alignment every microsecond. Every microsecond that I'm conscious of a failing, I make myself conscious of being conscious of the failing, and seek to remedy that. More so because I would like to look at my own reflection in a mirror and like what I see rather than not, because to see one's ugliness in a mirror hurts like hell. And I don't want to see ugliness in myself. So I'm doing it for very personal reasons, you know. But one plays these games with oneself. I don't have a discipline per se. Sitting in the heart, I understand the language. I understand the language. I've gone to some pains to speak about the psionic center, the navel, which is really the point at which we entered this hologram. If you want to go back to the first atom and first cell that was splitting, it was in the center of your navel. So go back to that point and sit in your navel, I would say, rather than the heart. The heart is a wonderful, faulty technology, as is the mind. I know what you mean. You're meaning that the Christ at heart, and in that sense, yes, without a doubt. But I would say that the travel to the navel, which is to say, review one's own journey through life, even if you're 96 years old, or you could be 16 years old. I certainly started before the age of 16 in this deep, turbulent self-reflection. I started very young, like many of us did or do. But you take yourself back on your journey as cleanly as possible, as honestly as possible. And that honesty can, in some cases, it needs to be quite savage with oneself. Certainly in my case, when one starts to see that one has a tendency to omit things and to fudge over certain things. So to learn to be incredibly, brutally honest with self is, for me, the answer to the question. If you can learn the art of being savage with oneself, and then being incredibly tender once you have confessed to self, so to speak, to then completely absolve self of the folly, and to be able to absolve yourself again and again and again. That's a healthy premise for evolution. That's the premise that I apply. I don't go to a Catholic confessional and speak to some perverted priest with shaved testicles sitting in his cassock. And I'm being crude for good reason, because I am sick to my stomach of the sanctimonious shit that's come out of the church and the perversity that it has exemplified for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's disgusting, and it has still not been addressed. It has still not been dealt with. We're still allowing these fetid toads in their fucking robes and their little booties to run around and run amok, and to still control the wealth of nations. The Vatican complex still controls NASA and our space observation and the narratives that issue therefrom. The Vatican complex of pedophilic satanic witchery still controls and controls Bank of England, Federal Reserve, central banking interests all around the world, which enslaves 8 billion human beings into indentured name, block, black capital, all cap names on bits of paper. So that is why I feel we need to address head on now religion and religiosity, whether you're talking about all of the monotheistic religious institutions need to be brought into dissolution. The only way they will be brought into dissolution is with the emergence of the mystical tradition of those beautiful faiths. I speak about Islam. I speak about Christianity. I speak about Buddhism, Hinduism, Shintoism, all of them. They've all been derailed. Every single one of them, without exception, have been derailed. And I say that, well, ultimately, any enlightened individual, male or female, and there is no such thing as transgender, you're either a woman or a man, a male or a female, it all comes down to the same equation, ultimately. but the religious construct must now be brought into dissolution in order for the Edenic privilege to restore. It cannot otherwise, because the exit from the Garden of Eden, so to speak, or from paradise, describes the journey of the religious, the organizing of spiritual dimension. So when bankers became priests and started to, or cashiers became priests, and started to organize life and reality, which is why the Vatican has ended up controlling space observation, because that's all they ever did, was control, finance, control. Whether you're talking about cartography and creating the maps from 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, or you're talking about mapping the constellations of the universe, it's all in the thrall of the satanic, Saturnian Roman Catholic Church, essentially. It's not just them. It's all the religious institutions are enmeshed in that sense. They're part of a collective egregore that violates foundational universal law by doing what? By controlling things. And in any control in the temporal sense that is exercised against living systems and against conscious sentient creatures is satanic. So that's why government, church, banking, consumerism, media, academia, every single application of civilization, civil, go back to the word. What are we talking about? So every application of civilization in that sense has become systemically corrupted with false light worship, Luciferianism or Satanism, Saturnian logic, Satanism, Luciferianism, false light worship. And that Saturnian logic and false light worship perfectly describes the status quo.
Sacha, when we're talking about courage, the word that came to mind is faith. And then you spoke about religion, and you also brought in the word faith, because, those people who are religious blindly have faith in the institution. But now we're talking about, with courage, to have faith in divinity, I believe. And I believe that that's what propels us through the journey and accompanies courage. Have you got anything to say about faith? Because now, just say the nurse hands in her resignation and she's a single mum of a couple of kids. She needs the faith from somewhere, right?
Yes, and I've been harsh in the past, especially in the last 2 years. I've spoken quite vehemently against faith and trust and hope. And I used those as examples to say, stop pinning the tail on that donkey of faith or of hope or of trust. Didn't you fucking learn anything from Barack Obama and his great era of hope? Did we learn nothing from these psyops? There is no such thing. To have faith is to suspend one's knowing. Why would you want to suspend one's knowing? Why not get into Atman? Why not get into foundational knowledge and reckoning and witness, a state of witness, that which self-exists, self-reveals, self-fulfills. You can see it, you can smell it. It's coming to you with a sledgehammer. It's going to beat your brains out. It's going to leave you for dead, and it's going to parasite off your bones. What is it called? It's called government and its taxes and its dirty little tricks in the courtroom to try and trick you into being penalized or incarcerated so that it can then devour you behind bars as a straw man. And so it goes on. Most people are decent. Most criminals are decent. 95+% of people in prisons don't belong there, never belonged there. Violently insane psychopaths absolutely need to be chained to a fucking wall and fed oatmeal or hot chocolate. I don't know or care. But they are subhuman. They've departed. I'm talking about 95+% of good humans who were tricked or tripped up in life by circumstance, not victims of, but nonetheless were tricked and tripped up by the machinations of a bedeviled existence. And let's face it, 99% of us have a bedeviled existence, navigating government, taxes, education, debt, all of that stuff, the poisons that you're trying to now prevent giving you cancer in life, whether it's what you're eating for breakfast, or whether you're walking through a 5G infused bus terminal, or whether you're whatever it is. Life is just a constant cacophony of trying to move through poisons and not die. That's what it comes down to. It's absurd. And that is all courtesy of government. And government is courtesy of the Roman Catholic Church. All governments are attributable and can be attributed to an extension of the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican complex. And I have lectured on this subject for years. I've lectured on the subject, just so you know, to bishops, high priests, high-ranking Freemasons on multiple occasions, and have never been proven wrong. But because there's nothing to prove wrong. It is what it is, what it is. As I said, self-revealing, self-fulfilling, self-reflecting. So to go back to faith, why would we continue to encourage ourselves, much less the nurse? Why would we try to encourage faith? Why not say, hang faith on the clothesline with your underwear, and just now focus on what you really know, what you really feel, what you really see, what you really touch in life. Get back to that, and take your kids and get back to that as well. Take whatever savings you've got, sell what you need to sell. Just get out of Dodge whilst you can. There is always an option. And yes, there is an element of faith in that the road will rise up to meet you. But it always does, but not if you're half-assed about something. And that here is actually the point, Gemma, is you can't fudge conscience any longer. You can't keep one foot in the door, which was the disgusting code that was spouted when I was younger. And that was the rationale in my rock and roll years. Just do this to get your foot in the door. Stunk. And I love myself for never having accepted that or acceded to that invitation. Dirty, dirty invitation. So the point is, to the young nurse who is abrogating her own conscience and therein and thereby abnegating her sovereign expression in this world. No, I don't pity you at all. I revere you as a sister, and I salute you as a daughter of God. Now, do the right thing. Do what feels right. Do what is resonant in your cells. And that is how you serve your children. That is how you serve God. And if we all simply defaulted into that rudiment, we would manifest heaven on earth almost instantaneously, because it's a logarithmic phenomenon. Right action leads to an incredible acceleration in bounty. Always does, always will.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look, I know for myself on my personal journey, when I'm heading in the right direction, my heart expands. And when I'm with someone who maybe, I'm sensing fear, my heart contracts. And so as a woman, it might be different for men. My heart leads the way. When you're saying there, you can feel it in every cell of your body. That's more where I feel it. And I loved how you chose the Heart of Sorrow as the title. So it is as if those emotions are in our heart.
Yes. Let me qualify. Okay, that's good that you brought this up. Thank you. Let me qualify. Yes, as a woman, you are absolutely going to be in everything in your constellation is going to be in orbit around the heart. And as a male, I have to say that everything in my constellation is more or less in orbit around here. more or less, more or less. But the point being, meaning to say, I will rationalize my way through things, you'll feel your way through things. And that's entirely as it should be. But we're not talking boys and girls now. We're talking enlightenment. We're talking the mechanics of enlightenment. And that is not agenda-based. So in that context, I know from personal experience that I had to also move into the heart in order to feel my way through the darkest hour. So that's how I navigated through my shamanic death and rebirth, was I departed the mind and entered into the heart, went into the heart of sorrow in that sense, died in that quanta, and became resurrected in that quanta. So I completely acknowledge and understand what it is you're saying, but I still say that what I learned in that shamanic process was it was a perfect synthesizing of the mind and the heart in that in that perfect moment of awakening in one's self, lower self into the capitalized self. That was a fusion of the head and the heart, whereupon they both phased each other out entirely, Gemma, entirely. The heart had served its exquisite purpose up to that point, which was a point of departure from time. And the mind had also served its purpose with excruciating accuracy up until that moment, that split second, that moment of timelessness, which was where I, at one moment in time, departed time, entered timelessness for an instant, and then could see in that state of suspended typhonic awareness, one was able to see all Alpha Omega. And in that state of hyper awareness, I became conscious and cognizant of one foundational truth in the temporal world, and that is that it all issued from the psionic center, which is the seat, the throne of being in the now, being here now. That was where the truest wisdom, the grail, the Solomon's key in that sense, would be accessed from the psionic center, which was the Christ at heart, and the mind brought into its default, which is pure genius and supernature. And then when you are in that throne for that one brief moment of timelessness, you hit what Dan Winter refers to as the bliss peak wave, absolutely euphoric. And in that state of being, everything shifts for all time. You are then able to resurrect. And as you resurrect, you carry forth with you much of that supernature, that genius comes with you back into your shitty little temporal life. And much of your Christ at heart, you carry with you back into your shitty little temporal life. So now you've been resurrected on the flip side of that shamanic death, and you have incredible tools and capacity now to forge and wield, embody, enact, and manifest in this valley of tears. That's my point. But I don't diminish at all the heart. I say that, yes, you have to sit so far and so deeply in the heart that you become at one with the living principle of the heart. For sure, for sure. But not to the exclusion of the mind and entering coherence with one's absolute genius. The fact that one is able in that perfect instant to recognize and lay claim to being divine, absolutely unified with divinity. There is no separation. There never was. There never was.
Yeah, well,
now, of course, sorry, carry on. I could speak about how that then becomes heresy when you return to earth, and then people will hate on you for being arrogant or for being this or that, simply because you speak to an ancient, immortal truth that horrifies people who are still carrying demons and ghouls on their shoulders. So they will naturally demonize people like me. And I never big myself up, which is why I use terrible language. Keep it grounded, you know. I don't ever want to go off with the fairies. I don't ever want to enter into that hallowed state of gurification. No interest, thank you very much. Keep it very, very real. But one has to come back from that state of momentary emancipation or actualization, and you have to come back reinvigorated for sure, where you can start to really take on big battles in this world. And I don't shy from battles in this world, but you do so with a sense of empowerment that is so far beyond the reach of any of the shitty little rocks that get thrown at your head, or the little poison darts that constantly hit you in the back. Yeah.
So when you know, we're here bringing heaven to earth, are we doing it by creating heaven within ourselves and unifying the mind and the heart and the masculine and the feminine, and then through the hologram projecting it out into our world? Because my world is different from your world and from everyone else who's watching, because the hologram is the reflection of what we've got in our hearts and minds. Is that
Yes.
what we're here, how we're creating heaven on earth?
Yes, I think that's very well stated. Yes, the human being is the capacitor for manifesting heaven on earth. That's what we are and why we are. And it's not just manifesting heaven on earth, it's manifesting heaven in the omniverse, to the celestine realms, anchoring them into all that is. So yes, indeed, there's no question in my mind about that. No question at all. Yeah, we can talk about the dynamics and the function of how that plays out. What does it mean to manifest heaven on earth? Well, in the first instance, as you become actualized in this temporal realm, it means that you have synthesized all lower elementals, humors, and forms in your own the fabric of your soul. You've moved them up to what I call frequency X. Frequency X is the heart center in that sense. And you've synthesized all the base frequency sets into frequency X. And now you can only but function from frequency X and above as you move into the realm. You've now become negentropic. You are no longer part of the entropy. You're no longer part of the parasite. Your life force and kundalini no longer feeds into the egregore or to the kingdom of the devil. You've now become a living saint. You're sanctified. You're Christed. You wear the mantle. That's a powerful and beautiful thing. And when you do that, you, Gemma, walking now as you do in the world, frequency X and above, always taking full account for your life and for the expression of this universe as it is witnessed through you, always in always, you take full accountability for it. You love it all. You empathize with it all. The pain felt by a zeta reticulan alien gray in some military base is your pain, and not just a human pain. You feel the pain of all creatures. Okay? This is powerful. This is beautiful, but you don't identify with it. So you don't own it. You don't bring it into your manifesting capacity, your temple, and then manifest sad things and sad stories. You've stopped that game. You played that game. I played that game. I'm a poet. Foundationally, I'm a poet. And so I still work with the theme of the beloved and with sorrow and with sadness. It's the theme of life. I can only but express it through poetry. That's my way of not allowing it into my cells. It's the way of not allowing myself to fall into the grip of entropy. I don't want to hurt. So I'll express it fully. I'll do it as beautifully as I can and as poignantly as I can as a gift. I'll let that butterfly go into the world. I don't publish it. I don't care. I don't make money from it. Just boom. That's it. That's it. And where your high expression, as you move into the world, only in a state of affirmation, creativity, and consciousness and expansiveness, I'm doing the same thing. And you and I now have the hyperspheres are open to the celestial song that we represent. And the entanglement begins. You, me, and our brothers and sisters who are all the meek inheriting the earth, all walking into that beautiful golden new earth horizon. We are the ones who are now entangling these affirmations and the beauty, the consciousness, and that becomes the true reckoning. That becomes the salvation aspect through the reckoning. And that brings about the dissolution of the egregore. This is the key thing. So the activation of the noosphere is not about how many places you can build on earth that are temples to the gods, or how you can circumscribe sacred geometry here and there. None of that bullshit applies. It's how you and I, as the living Christed temples, move around the plane of the earth and we engage the hyperspheres into the celestial song. That's what's actually happening. And to those of us who are carried by, through, from, and within that celestial song, we don't know any different. We can only keep dialing up the frequency. We can only keep dialing up the beauty and the consciousness and the affirmation. And that's what then manifests. So yes, we are the true geometers, the true architects of heaven on earth.
Yeah. And that's like, no one's coming to save us. No external person, force, deity is coming to save us. Yeah, we save ourselves through this experience.
No. I mean, Kamala Harris clearly stated on the presidential podium this week that that government was coming to rescue us, and Joseph Biden is going to be announcing a rescue package. So,
Right.
Ye of little faith, Gemma.
Sacha, I'm really interested what you said about writing poetry, because I write poetry too. And I'm just wondering, does your poetry come through your heart or your mind?
Well, let me start by saying that your poetry better be good poetry, because there's nothing worse than a bad poet. And I'm one of those fascistic poets that believe that bad poets should be executed, and all bad poems should be thrown on the funerary pyre. That said, I'm assuming your poetry is pretty good. if your nature is anything to go by and your intelligence is anything to go by. But no, jokes aside, for me, poetry is a very important transmutative and to some extent transcendent medium. I would say the most important. I'm a trained sculptor, fine artist, painter, academy trained, to some extent architect, to some extent even trained in that. I'm a passionate private geometer, have been for over 30 years, a musician, not a very accomplished one musically, but as a composer, I'm very proficient, and as a performer, singer, very, very, very good, very capable. And as a songwriter, bordering outstanding. And as a poet, I'm exemplary. So I know that, and I don't need anyone to tell me otherwise. I write poetry to myself. I don't write it to an audience per se. I'm very happy to have feedback, because it's like this. I know that if it touches me, it will touch you. And I'm honest enough and empathic enough to know that if it doesn't touch me, it won't touch you. And so that's it. It's an audience of one, which is me, and my connection to Atman. That is the perennial witness, and that is my judge and jury. I am the witness. I am the audience. I am the poet and the soothsayer. And it's a very privileged place to be within the throne of self. That's all I can say. And it's not that I sit reading my poetry, because I don't. After I've written it, I never reflect on it. I never read it. Never. You won't find me reading it. I don't listen to my own music. My albums, they were mothballed years ago when I withdrew everything, even off the web, because we contain all the publishing. And I don't look over my shoulder at art. My sculptures decompose and deconstruct, except the ones that were done in bronze, and they still will stand for 1,000 years. And some of them are in storage, others have fallen apart. I just don't know, don't care. My paintings have all fallen into rack and ruin, or been given there to friends and family and people around the world over the years. I don't revere myself by staring in. Oh, sorry, this is one of my directors trying to call me. That was not helpful. Let me just turn Skype off. Forgive me for that.
Would you like me to pause?
Not at all. No, don't do that. Let me just, because otherwise she's going to keep trying to call me. There we go. I'm do not disturb now. I'm so sorry. So I don't revere myself, and I don't adulate myself, and I don't engage in eye gazing in a mirror. It's not that. It's just that for me, I know what I'm doing when it comes to the abstraction of the language of poetry. I'm in my saddle in that space, and I'm not in my saddle in any other arena in life. I'd like to think I am, I'd like to think I'm proficient at multiple things, but with syntax, weighing, and measuring every single word, for me is it's a very powerful and beautiful medium, and that can be something which really entrains the monkey mind and the ego. And you can't be a good poet if you have an ego, incidentally. So to all those naysayers and Sacha Stone haters, fuck you in the first instance. But secondly, you can't be a good poet and be a raving egomaniac. They don't go hand in hand. Not unless you're Welsh and a drunk.
Sacha, I wonder if, because when I'm writing, I can feel the energy coming through my heart, as opposed to if I was writing a scholastic essay that comes through the head, right? And I see it as divinity being channeled as the creative force, and we might do it in poetry. Others might do it through art or building. And is that a pure heart, an unblocked heart, or an aware heart, the channel for us to manifest through creation divinity here on earth?
Well, you see, there you go, banging on about the heart again. So look, there's a very simple, litmus test, and when I see you, I'm going to grab you by your ankles and I'm going to shake you upside down, and we're going to listen for a rattle. Okay, it's going to sound like a walnut in your chest cavity, and we're going to see if you have a heart or not. Okay, but that notwithstanding, let me answer the question. Probably yes is the answer.
Thank you. I'd love to hear you read one of your poems, but I also respect that you might not want to read this as well.
Hell will freeze over before I do that. That's never going to happen, but thank you. That's very kind.
Sacha, I do respect that you are on a time limit today. Is there anything that needs to be said to wrap this conversation up?
I'm not prepared with any footnotes. No, not particularly. I mean, I like the fact that you advocate for the heart, and it could be said that as a seasoned rogue, that there is an aspect of me that has a blind spot. I've heard this certainly from women that I've loved and been in love with and have been in love with me. And I've heard this on multiple occasions over the years from them. But then can one really take one's former lovers and their opinions seriously in anything? I don't know that one can or should, but I have heard it said that, I'm suffering from some sort of heinous blind spot connected to some terrible childhood trauma, probably mother related, and that I have huge blind spots and omissions when it comes to understanding things of the heart. But honestly, I am the witness of self, no one else. And if anyone else is, even a past lover, is casting judgment, their judgment will always be flawed. Not because they have bad perspective, but because they foundationally breached universal law by making any kind of judgment whatsoever. So therein lies the wrong action. So how can something positive come out of a wrong action? It cannot. That's also universal law. So all judgments in that sense are wrong. So I cannot judge you. That's why I said I would only shake you by the ankles to see if there's a rattle in your chest cavity. And then we could say that the heart. But I'm just not going to judge another human being when it comes to anything. We mustn't do it. But I love the fact that you advocate for the heart. And I do still recognize that there is a slim possibility that I've not fully acquainted myself with the metric of the heart as you, as an exemplary woman, speak to it with such a beautiful resonance. I hope that my own take on things relating to the heart and heartfulness, I hope that what I've said and how I speak to it is not taken the wrong way and is not too crude or callous, because obviously I'm a heart-centered individual that you would be insanely blind not to recognize. You can't walk the walk that I've walked and do what I've done on public record for so many years without foundationally being seated in the heart and caring and wanting to resolve or find remedy. It's just not within the realm of possibility. But again, when we're talking about the heart, are we talking about this exquisite organ within the chest cavity that great scientists like Dan Winter, I'm alluding to him a lot today because he really is the ultimate scientist of the heart, in my view. And at some point, I'd love to do a really big kind of symposium with Dan Winter and David Sarita and others, just focused on the true nature and function of the heart. But Dan Winter and his great work demonstrates in pure physics how the movement of the muscles of the heart as the heart is beating with this centrifugal and centripetal spin, at the compression point where these two muscles do this. And at that compression point of the funnel, of the spiral vortex, the counter vortex, at that maximum pressure point, there's a moment of absolute death with every heartbeat where there is nothing. You've literally cut everything out. Then the life force comes. Then it's cut off again. Then the life force comes in. And there's this exquisite reckoning of how it works. The heart is literally pumping into the temporal universe. The universal mind, the Godhead, is being pumped in with this exquisite force. And that creature, that heart, if you were to take slides of the musculature and the way that it's actually moving, the torsion energetics, and if you were to freeze frame it, and they've done it, and Dan Winters is part of that discovery, you see the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet, and all Aramaic, all alphabet is actually encoded in the movement, the actual symbols, alpha, omega, delta, all of them issue from the movement of the human heart. So all speaking, all alphabet, all communication, syntax, it all speaks to the heart. And in that sense, you're absolutely correct. When I talk about the psionic center, I'm talking about transmuting the heart and the mind into their transcendent, unified principle and positioning one's state of witness in that quanta, in that vector, in order for us to literally be sons and daughters of God in the truest sense. I'll leave it at that.
Sasha, have I got time to say something else, or you're done?
Surely.
Oh, thank you. So what about the frequency of the heart? You spoke so beautifully about the biology and the physics of the actual, what you referred to our last conversation as a pump. So I think we progressed a long way from the pump to, where we are today. But I feel it as an energy, as the frequency of the heart is 5 to 8 hertz, right? The same as the earth. Whereas every
Yeah.
chakra has its own frequency.
Yeah.
And that is the frequency of creation. Now, we know through manifestation, we need the thought, which is maybe 10% of the manifestation, but it's the energy, the emotion of the heart that is actually doing the manifesting work. So we can be thinking, for example, I want a new car, but if we're not feeling the joy of receiving that car, we're not going to get very far. So I'm more referring to the energy of the heart, that chakra center, that expansion of the heart that we then manifest as creation, as divinity, into what we said, manifesting heaven on earth.
Well, actually, it's more than that. It's the knowing that you're going to achieve that manifest. So it's the knowing that you've got to take that power of manifestation even further, and know that you are healing the cancer, and know that you have already got that fucking Range Rover or whatever it is that turns you on. And it's okay. There is no judgment there at all. There's nothing wrong, with wanting a Maserati. I've had a Maserati, a brand new Maserati. It's great fun. And then I didn't have it anymore. It doesn't matter, But I'm just saying, it's fun. It's fun to say I want something absurd and then have it and then let it go. I've done that. Thank you very much. Don't need it. Yeah. But it's more the knowing than anything else. And that goes back to what we were speaking to a little earlier, which is where and let me try and thread the heart into this, because the business of faith and of trust and of hope is kind of a language that sits in and around the human heart. I believe in you. I have faith in you. I trust in you. Don't let me down. And that's heartfulness. Whereas the mind is a different matter. And the mind will speculate and analyze and try to mitigate and to ensure against outcomes and to engineer and orchestrate outcomes. So you've got that going on, and you've got the hoping, trusting, faithful bit going on, but it's still not the thing. It's the foundational knowing that manifests something into the mortal realm. And that's where we are functioning as gods, or as sons and daughters of God at the very least. And this is where we're headed, just so you know. In very, very short thrift, we're going to be at that vertical ascension event horizon, whereupon we will, those of us who remain embodied, will be able to manifest reality instantaneously, simply through ideation. And that ultimately is where it's at. How do you think it is that there are trillions to the power of trillions of galaxies out there, each of them with trillions to the power of trillions of solar systems, each with scores and scores of planetary bodies floating around central suns? So we've got this limitless canvas out there. Who or what is manifesting these worlds and these limitless realms of ecstatic expression, if not the witness, the great architect, the great geometer, which is you and I, once we've grown up and restored ourselves to our thrones and been crowned upon those thrones by the capitalized self again. There is no cavalry. There is no audience. There is no reception committee. Ultimately, there is the great reckoning is you and I in the now, and this collective becoming or coming of age is almost certainly happening in our era, in our lifetime. And again, that's also speaks to why COVID certification of vaccine identification was such an important play by the last vestige of the satanic, Saturnian, Luciferic egregore as it moves into a tailspin and is required to depart for all time into dissolution. It has to play a final card in the echo chamber of its own projections in order to try to simply maintain its own flailing imagined life force for one more cycle, whether that cycle is a 7-day cycle or a 7-year cycle or a millennial cycle. It doesn't know or care. It just wants to play out. So the Anthony Fauci's, as I've been saying for some time, these icons, these archetypes, don't in and of themselves foundationally exist. If you were to take the man and hold him under an ultraviolet light, you probably wouldn't find anything there. If you were to do Kirlian photography, I think you'd find he probably didn't have an auric field. I may be wrong, but my sense is that these are not ensouled creatures. The ones that have gone so far into the great depravity of existence don't have soul any longer. All that resonance is no longer there. It's voided. It's gone. But they are hollow vessels or proxies through which the elemental cloud intelligence, the egregore, can and does still, or the archonic element still functions through those unensouled vessels. And I think you'll find in your own life, there's a number of those characters that you maybe work amongst and live amongst and move amongst without even knowing it. But yeah, this is part of the great reckoning, and all of this stuff will become very explicit to all of us in the time ahead. And by the time ahead, I mean really, let's say but certainly between now and 2030, but arguably a lot sooner, arguably between now and 2025, when some very pivotal event horizons are going to be impacting Earth.
Can we sum it up, Sacha, by saying dark to light?
You could, but I wouldn't join you in that. So in the first instance, of course, I know what you mean. Of course, I know what you mean. But no, it's still, the word dark is caught up in a dialectic. The word light is caught up in a dialectic, as is male and female, as is anything that's caught on one side of the polarity or the other, or the duality or the other. And we must, if we want to sign off on anything, we must sign off on absolution. We must allow these ideas to remain where they were birthed, which is within the realm of duality. That realm is departing us. And so there's a sign-off happening as far as the satanic realm of duality is concerned, almost certainly. All is light. All is born of light. We know this. We know this anyway. But I deeply appreciate increasingly the role that the devil, proverbial devil, has played in this extraordinary orchestra of so-called reality in the 3D temporal realm for millennia. According to dear Dave Emery, we're talking now about a 1.4 trillion year trajectory. And I'm going to drill into that with him in the next Lazarus Symposium a lot deeper. But that there is a departure from time altogether. Time describes light and dark, night and day, up and down, left and right, male and female, good and evil, being the ultimate expressions of duality. And they were all right and proper. The kingdom of the devil was only ever there to serve you and I in the elevation and the orchestration and the emergence and the evolution of the fabric of our soul. Now that we've dispensed with that dialectic of night and day, good and evil, light and dark, let's not even speak to it. Let's simply move now into the realm of Atman, which is, yes, the Christ at heart, the great heart, the universal heart, absolutely, and be received as we should, as we ought, as we must, as the sons and daughters of God, and thereby as the meek who inherit the earth.
Amazing. Thank you, Sacha.
Thank you.
Love
Thank
from
you.
my heart to yours.
Thank you. Let's have a lovely day. Bye-bye now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. And I'll be back in another few days with another episode of Man Speak. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, get the message out, and thanks for watching.